Hello, 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 and happy 4th of July. Let me get my background straightened up here. Super excited to be with you for just a few minutes, but I wanted to wish us all a happy Independence Day and remember, take a few moments to just remember those that have gone before us, remember the sacrifices that were made. Remember that perhaps we were made for this time in history. It took people like Commander George Washington, General George Washington, who was the commander in chief of our nation before we had a president, fighting and scratching and clawing for even funding for the Continental Army, filled with a nation of turncoats and traitors, filled with at least a third of the nation still loyal to the crown, at least a third of the nation doing absolutely nothing and fighting with the meager leftovers that they had in places like Brandywine battlefield, where there was 11,000 men for 11 hours that fought on 9/11/1777. It was the second longest battle of the Revolutionary War and the largest battle. They say there were upwards of 30 to 32,000 people involved in just that one battle. That battle was super critical to the revolution, because it was at Brandywine where the Continental Army got pushed back. And from that point on, for the next 14 days, the next 2 weeks, the rest of the Philadelphia campaign was miserable for the Continental Army. In fact, we lost our United States Capitol. The governmental leaders had to go into hiding. They had to go to other cities. They had to have bodyguards. They were fear for their lives. People that signed the Declaration of Independence were being actively hunted by the British so they could be hung for treason. It was a very troubling time, and what we had as our capital was gone. Philadelphia was overrun. It was overtaken. And so it was shortly after that, in the winter of 1777, where December 19th, General George Washington shows up at a place called Valley Forge and says, we can winter here. There was actually a forge that was there. That's why it's called Valley Forge. But there's beautiful valleys and some rolling hills and some places for ditches and creeks and fortifications. And so that's where they planted, and that's where they made as their place. If you've ever been in the military, we don't like to say retreat. We like to say a strategic withdrawal, and that's what it was. Valley Forge was a strategic withdrawal, but it was 6 or 7 months long. They went there in December and didn't reemerge until summer of the following year. But during that time, they lost 2,000 men. They had women and children with them. They had wives and families that traveled with them to do things like cook and to mend and and to support them and to be near to their loved ones. And so it actually became, I think, the third or fourth largest city in the United States at that time because of how many people were there, all of the cooking for thousands and thousands of men, and the training that went on, and the things that happened at that place that allowed them to come back, a stronger army, a better trained army against the most formidable fighting force in the world, the largest army and navy at that time in the British Empire. And to not only come back, but to come back and just have decisive win after decisive win. Valley Forge was the low point of the war, but the war wasn't over for several years beyond that. But it was during that time that George Washington, I believe, shifted as a leader. It's where he found his strength, just like David just before Ziklag, right? When he lost everything, when they lost their wives and their families and had all of their possessions and stuff taken. It says that David found his strength in the Lord his God. But that's exactly what happened, I believe, to George Washington at Valley Forge. It was a privilege to stand in the house that was his. It was a rented house, but it was the house that was his house and his headquarters. Both the headquarters of George Washington at Valley Forge and the headquarters at the Brandywine battlefield. It's interesting because show a few pictures. This picture was actually the John Chad's house, and it was out this window that they believed that George Washington looked to see where the British were coming related to the Brandywine River. This was the place where George Washington's headquarters were. This, of course, the famous portrait of representing George Washington at Valley Forge, where it was rumored that he would go into the woods by himself and he would kneel down next to his horse and he would seek the one true and living God for the salvation of our nation, for the support of the troops, for the courage to lead in difficult and troubled times. Here's some other pictures. These are pictures from Brandywine. I love the cobblestone homes and the old growth pine trees. I love the inside, the desk, and they even have a note, a receipt that George Washington gave to the owner of the house. The walk-in fireplaces, the maps on the table, the map of the Brandywine battlefield on point. But I wanted to give you an idea, and I wanted to share with you one picture in particular, which is this picture. I don't know if you can see the outline, but this to me looks like an eagle landing, and this is actually George Washington's house. It was the headquarters at the Brandywine battlefield. There's another different picture. I have several pictures where you can see. Here's another one where you see the head in the center there and then the wings on either side. I actually have a cutout picture or a trace picture that I want to overlay this so you can see what I see, but hopefully you can see to the left, starting in the middle of the center and then going up towards the top left. I see that as the right wing. And the streamers up towards the top of the tree branch on the right, I see that as the left wing. And then, of course, the plumage in the middle, which would be the beak and the head, and then the center of the body. And then down below is the talons, and the talons are carrying something. It looks like it could be a scroll, like a message, which I think is interesting because it was at the Brandywine battlefield, which is 25 minutes away. I'm sorry, it was at Valley Forge. It was 20 minutes away from the Brandywine battlefield where he received the visitation from the angel, and he had the three visions of the three great woes. We've mentioned those before. We're going to go into those in more detail because I think they're important for this time that we're in right now. Here's the placard of the Brandywine battlefield. Here's some more pictures of the area. It was very solemn being there. It was a privilege to be there. It was a joy to be there, to places where George Washington walked, and to particularly the room that he received a visitation. That was really interesting. And even to be able to step foot inside his bedroom and to see where they slept, where him and Martha slept for the encampment for months and months. So I wonder how many dreams he was given at those times. I wonder how God spoke to him in those places. And the only thing that we know for sure is the three visions. By the way, if you do some research on the three visions, there's a lot of people, or some people that throw shade on it. And I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to find the authenticity of the source. It was a 99-year-old guy that told the story to a reporter in 1860 who published it just before the Civil War. And this reporter also published several other op-ed pieces about dreams that General Grant had, and possibly Lincoln and others. We know Lincoln was an avid dreamer. We know Grant and Lincoln talked about Lincoln's dreams actually on the day that he was shot. So these are historical facts. But when they try to trace back this 99-year-old gentleman who said he was with George Washington at Valley Forge, they have a hard time finding it in the rolls. I worked for the federal government, and in particular the military, and I'm here to tell you, when you're trying to find records that are some 200 odd years old, or you're basing it on the memory of a 99-year-old gentleman, he could have got the dates wrong. He could have got the times wrong. But I can tell you from my study of the voice of God and listening to what God is saying, that the visions of George Washington, they're in the language of God. They're not made up. We've had people submit made up dreams before, and we can tell. And these are not made up. And the third one, do yourself a favor. Take some time today and get alone and listen. Just read the third vision of George Washington, because I am 100% convinced that what he saw is the time that we're in. He saw the globalist spirit, or all the nations of the world against the Union. He saw massive amounts of armed young men streaming across the border and coming in by boat that he described as these dark black clouds that were forming, and they were rioting and they were burning cities in America. And this is what he saw. And I don't say that to depress us. I say that to rally the troops like he did at Valley Forge, and realize it's not for such a time as this. It's for this time that you were born. It's for this time that you were here. It's for this time that you live in this nation. And if you don't realize the moment of destiny that we are in this year, this all important election year, if you don't do your research, if you don't understand what's at stake, if you vote because of personality or because of propaganda or because of popularity, you could miss your moment. And if you're a leader, let's lead. Let's not tell people to just pray. If you're an intercessor, pray your heart out. Absolutely. We should all be praying for this nation. We should pray constantly for this nation and for our leaders. But if you're a leader, if you're a leader of a church, if you're a leader of a company, if you're a political leader, don't just pray, act. George Washington was a leader. He grabbed a musket, he led an army, and he secured your liberty and freedom. The reason you're watching fireworks today, the reason you're having barbecues today, is because George Washington and the men of the Continental Army and the women that supported them, the families that laid it on the line, the signers of the Declaration of Independence, who were on the run at this point, who were on the run during the Brandywine battle and up until Valley Forge and after the Philadelphia campaign, when we lost the Capitol, when the days were dark, when they were thinking that they could very well be captured and hung for treason, but they put it all out on the line. They laid it all down. The Bible says, greater love has no man than this, that he lays down his life for his friend. And it also says in Revelation, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And they did not love their lives even unto death. If you're just going to pray as a leader, that doesn't take a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to make a stand. It takes a lot of courage to push back against government tyranny. It takes a lot of courage to speak up when things are unpopular and to push against the propaganda. It takes a lot of courage to lead. And we have leaders in this generation, and we've seen them, leaders like Art Pulowski in Canada and so many other leaders, even in America. But let's pray for our nation, but let's not just pray. Let's ask God tonight even to give you a dream of what your piece is in securing our freedom and the destiny of this nation for this time and for the next generation to come. I want to encourage you, don't let this be an Independence Day like any other, where we party and we shoot off fireworks and we have barbecues and we just spend time with family and friends. Dig deep and say, what do I need to do in this all critical moment in our nation's history to continue the freedom and the liberty that America has? Could I be a brave man or a woman that is called not for such a time as this, but for this very time in the history of our nation? If I'm right, if we are in the final battle, the third great woe, literally the survival of our country is on the line right now in this hour. If this is the third great woe, the globalist spirit, the nations of the world against the Union, this is what George Washington saw, and it was fearful for him to see. But you know what? There was divine intervention. There were massive points of light, hundreds of lights that came down from heaven. He saw angelic intervention and he saw supernatural intervention. When he said, when way nigh the Union was nearly overcome, he saw the intervention of God in our nation. That's what we pray for. But consider the option that he might use you to lead, that he might use you to grab a weapon, which could be a pen or a political office, or it could be to form a group of people, or it could be to wield some level of influence that you have, or it could be to build a platform or encourage each other or another, or send money or support those that are on the front lines. There are people that are embattled right now, that are in prison unjustly because of their freedom. We've had a former president unjustly charged. We have people that are laying literally their lives and their fortunes on the line for the freedom of this nation. Do not be part of the 1/3 that thinks everything is okay and buys into the propagandist lie of what's happening in America. And also, don't be the 1/3 that does nothing. Don't sit comfortably at your barbecues and in your churches this weekend and in your pews and say, well, there's nothing that I need to do. We're just going to wait it out. We're going to see what happens. And I got food for me and my family and us four, no more. Would he not use the unlikely? Would he not use an Esther or a Deborah or a Daniel or a Joseph or a David? But you know what? They stepped into their moment. They realized now is when I find my strength in the Lord, my God, just like General George Washington did. And they secured the freedom for their families and for their generations and for their nations. And there are countries that didn't get wiped off the map when they should have and they could have thousands of years ago because brave souls like a young shepherd boy stepped up and planted a rock between the eyes of a fearsome giant and then cut off his head, because they routed foreign armies like General George Washington did. So ponder this and ponder deep and think hard and invite God to task you with something that may stretch you so outside of your comfort zone, but it may secure the freedom and the liberty of this nation for generations to come. You could be part of this story. You could be part of the angelic or the divine help, the angelic assisted help that George Washington saw that routed the globalist spirit in the third great woe. So be inspired. Be inspired by my trip to Valley Forge, by the retelling of just some of the pieces of the Brandywine battlefield, and by what God is doing today. We're interpreting dreams that are a battlefield, and they're giving a play-by-play of principalities that have invaded this country from foreign lands that are going to be routed, and they're going to be sent back, and the altars are going to be destroyed, and their thrones are going to be removed. That's what's happening. That's what we're actively working on. If you don't know what to do, join my team. We're just a group of lowly dream interpreters. That's all we do. But I can train you how to find spiritual intelligence in a dream. You can be part of what we're doing. If you don't know what else to do, obviously pray. Yes, of course, pray, but pray and act. Could you be some of the ones that provide intelligence to leaders, whether they're apostolic leaders who need to know how to do spiritual warfare, or whether they're governmental leaders who know how to position for this next season, or whether they're people working the selection of our next president who need to know how to make sure things are integrous and just and fair. I don't know what your role is. I'm clear as to what mine is, but I challenge you, get clear and dig deep and ask God to use you in the salvation and the reemergence of this nation, coming from a time where we've been beleaguered and we've been battled and we're battle weary, to a time that we're trained and we're rested and we're ready to move forward for all that God has for us in this generation and the next.